So it took him 15 years to negotiate the journey up to this point, to the transforming union, which is the decisive breakthrough into freedom, not only beyond addiction, but beyond preference. But still that question and the Lord's answer kind of lingers in our memory. Do you find the Lord's answer really convincing? I was right here, watching to see you in action. It doesn't sound too convincing, to me anyway. It seems he could have come a little sooner, and why all this delay? And when you're in such straits as Anthony, especially in the night of the Spirit, when you feel abandoned by God, everything seems lost, you feel powerless, you would think he could give you, because he's infinitely merciful, some little milk of human kindness. Okay. He doesn't show you any help at all. He's just waiting to see us in action. Okay. I don't know that it's easy to explain suffering. Book of Job discusses it, but it never really answers it. And there is some human suffering that is so god-awful that there's just no rational explanation from it. It's just there, and you just have to say it happened. It is, or it's happening to me. But God doesn't need a second guesser or somebody to stand up for him. But I heard this parable, or read it rather some time ago, and it seems to me to speak to this situation, and I'll share it with you now. And I found it in a book edited by Christopher Isherwood, and the book is the Vedanta for the Western World. And I'm elaborating somewhat on the original story, but that's where the source of it comes from. This is the story about a great scientist who had devoted his life to developing a new strain of butterflies that would be the most beautiful combination of colors and order of coloring that had ever occurred on this planet. And so after many years he had successfully reached a point where he was certain that this cocoon that he had nursed along would produce this masterpiece, and then he would then receive the Nobel Prize or other thing. So on the day that it was expected to emerge from the cocoon, he gathered together his staff, and all were waiting breathlessly as this little creature began to work its way out of the cocoon. Sure enough, it got out with its right wing and its body and its left wing, and all were ready to let out cheers and pass the champagne and the cigars, when all of a sudden a deep silence descended on the room as they saw with horror that the wingspan of this butterfly had gotten stuck at the last moment in the mouth of the cocoon, and he couldn't quite get out. And so the little creature was flapping madly with its one free wing to get out. And they were urging it on and cheering and so on. And yet, as it worked hard at this thing, it was getting more and more tired, and it would pause for longer and longer intervals to get its strength back. And then there would be a flop, 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 and a long pause. And finally there was just a flop, and then a flop, and then a flop. Well, the scientist just couldn't stand it anymore. He took his little scalpel and he cut the tiniest little millimeter from the edge of the lip of this cocoon in order to free the butterfly. And sure enough, with one final burst of energy and life, the movement of survival, it flapped and fell free onto the laboratory table. Everybody cheered, and they started opening the champagne and passing the cigars and cabling the success of this to the press, when all of a sudden, once again, a great silence descended upon the room as everybody realized to their horror that it was alive and free, but it couldn't fly. It just sat there on the table, and it never flew. And why? Because the struggle to get out of the cocoon is nature's way of forcing the juices or the blood to the utmost corners or outreaches of this gorgeous creature we know as a butterfly, so that when it emerges from the cocoon, it can enjoy the transformed life of a worm and can fly to its heart's delight in the sunshine. And so what this scientist did was to save this creature's life, but in doing so, he truncated its capacity to function in the new life. And so it was as good as dead. It was a dud. What good is a butterfly that can't fly? It's a contradiction in terms. So this is a mistake that God will not do. And so this image of Christ watching Anthony has to be understood. Christ is dying to come to his help. With all his almighty power, he has to hold back infinite mercy from rushing to the rescue when we're in trouble and in temptation and in the dark night. And it's only because he knows that if he intervenes too soon, the struggle that is actually freeing us and pushing the divine energy into every level of our being, every aspect of our consciousness, even into our bodies, toes, and muscles, everything. If he comes through too soon, it means we may be beautiful to look at, very holy, but we'll make a better statue than a transformed human being. And God is transforming us in order to do something with this incredible energy. And so we should think then, when we're in great trials, that they're hurting God much more than us, and we should encourage him. I know one lady who has the experience, it would seem, of many conversations with Christ. When she was a little girl, he used to visit her in the garden and invite her to play games with him. And so when she grew up, those kind of diminished, but she went on to complete her transformation, and she ministers. She brought up a large family, 7 or 8 children, and now she ministers to people on the spiritual journey. But she once says that when she feels great trials, she tells God, "Now God, don't feel bad. We'll get through it. I know you're suffering more than I do, and I feel so sorry for you. I love you." And so this is the right attitude, because it's killing God not to help us. He's dying to come to our aid, but if he comes too soon, he may frustrate the ultimate transformation, which requires the purification. There's no way out of the dismantling of the false self-system and the more deep purification of our spirit, so that when the divine life is transferred, its energy may flow freely and fruitfully through us and produce a thoroughly integrated human being. That's God's project. It's monumental, but that's what it is. And so when Anthony experienced that freedom, he entered into what we call, or John of the Cross calls, the transforming union. And let's just see what he did next. The transforming union releases the divine energy, and so you have to do something. It's not something one can sit on. And so here I'll return to the text. On the next day he went out, inspired with an even greater zeal for the service of God. It accumulates, it gets stronger as it gets busy. And where did he go? He headed for the desert. Wow! I'm responding out of the 4th century now. The desert is not only the stronghold of the demons, it's not only his frontline trenches, so to speak, it's his military-industrial complex. That's where he devises all these terrific worldwide projects to ruin everybody's lives if he can get away with it. And so Anthony going to the desert is a march into the desert. It's a complete mistake to think that monastic life is leaving the world, running away from the world. It's the aggressive action of a transformed person who is taking on the powers in the high places that Paul calls about in order to wrench from them their insidious and seductive power over at least a part of the human family, the local situation. So it's not child's play, believe me, and it's not kindergarten, it's postgraduate work, believe me, in the spiritual journey. And so the desert then, as the symbol of the demon's central location and industrial complex, when Anthony moved in there, he significantly lodges in a fort, the symbol of the demon's ammunition dump or whatever it was. And as he went in, the reptiles that filled it got out the other side as fast as they could. And here again, Anthony's great love of solitude took over. And again, he had his friends come and lock him into this fort where he stayed for 20 years uninterruptedly, seeing no one and practicing an extreme form of solitude. A solitude that he certainly could not possibly have lived without having first entered into this state. Now, the energy of divine union has to be expressed. It can be expressed in diverse ways. It can be expressed in patience in a long illness. It can be expressed by intense solitude. It can be expressed by a very apostolic life or ministry. But it has to express itself in a more than ordinary level of human activity, because the energy that the divine union releases is tremendous. And it's like the particle in particle physics returning to the wave pattern from which it came, where the power is much more intense in the wave, which is undifferentiated, than in the particle. So this is a movement into plugging into the very heart of the energy of the universe that Anthony's involved in, and that's where he drew his strength. And so he spent the next 20 years battling with the demons. His friends sometimes came and thought there was a riot in the fort, but it was just him fighting the demons. But the demons weren't getting the better of him. They were trying to get away from him now. In other words, the roles are now reversed. And as if they were locked up in this fort trying to get away, and they're under his power and influence. And so he uses the Psalms, the phrases from the Psalms, to kind of beat them over the head and batter them and make them let go of their power over innocent people and so on. And so he loves to use those strong sounding sentences from the Psalms, such as, let God arise and his enemies be scattered. As the smoke vanishes, so let them vanish away. All nations compass me about, and in the name of the Lord I drove them off. Finally, after 20 years, he's now 55, his friends got the idea of tearing down the door, and he seemed to have taken that as a symbol of of the call of God to emerge from the fort. And so he emerges from the fort as out of a shrine, as one initiated into sacred mysteries and filled with the Spirit of God. It was the first time he showed himself outside the fort to those who came to him. When they saw him, they were astonished to see that his body had kept its former appearance. He was neither fat from want of exercise, nor emaciated from his fasting and struggles. He was the same man they had known before his retirement. Again, the state of his soul was pure, for it was neither contracted by grief, nor dissipated by pleasure, nor pervaded by jollity. He was not embarrassed when he saw the crowd, nor was he elated at seeing so many there to receive him. No, he had himself completely under control, a man guided by reason and stable in his character. And his words were, he exhorted all to prefer nothing in the world to the love of Christ. And then he began to turn the desert that had belonged to the demons into a place of monasteries and peace. And it was filled with as many as 10,000 monks after a few generations. Anthony's experience of the spiritual journey helps to clarify and give us a concrete example of how this way of the divine action works out in our life. And so we can say, after having observed his 3 temptations, that the first temptation was to return to the ordinary life he had left and to abandon the spiritual journey. When he reacted vigorously to those various suggestions of the demon, he entered into what has more recently been called the night of sense, in which the divine action lays to rest once and for all the self-centered and selfish motivation in our behavior and dispositions. And then, having enjoyed a certain plateau in which he worked that new freedom into his ordinary daily life and relationships, he moved into the third confrontation, which John of the Cross calls the night of spirit. Now, just to distinguish those nights for a moment, apparently the night of sense is designed to enable us to take full personal responsibility for our action and decisions, without projecting on others and without being over-identified with group identifications and excessive or naive loyalties. Loyalty is a great thing, but it's not an absolute. And so along comes the night of the Spirit, which seems to be directed at the purification of the mythical membership over identifications. So that just as the night of sense freed us from the dominance of the emotional programs for happiness that we brought with us from earliest childhood, so the night of spirit frees us from the preconceived ideas and the prepackaged value systems that we unquestioningly interiorized during the age of 4 to 7, when we absorbed the attitudes of parents, religious teachers, cultural conditioning, peer group pressure, and the like. In other words, there's a gradual freeing from childishness, from the fixations of not having integrated each level of our evolving human nature into the next one. We moved on biologically, we moved on physically into adulthood, we may have moved on intellectually into adulthood. The point is, almost all of us have failed to make the corresponding integration emotionally. This is what is healed in the dark nights, so that we can have a fully integrated human nature and a firm basis on which the communications of God's light and life and love may flow freely through us, and ever more freely. And so notice, when Anthony walked towards those tombs, what was he doing? He was denying all the cultural conditioning about the terrors of demons and the terrors of the tombs, and putting this colossal trust in God. And by this generous act, he freed himself, with God's help completely, from his undue bias, prejudice, preconditioning. In other words, the night of sense frees us from cultural conditioning insofar as it is hindering our response to the values of the gospel, to the true values that are opening out and calling to us from higher reaches of the spiritual journey and inviting us into perfect freedom. And so we could say that, and you see this again and again in the lives of holy people and in the examples you find in Scripture, at some point our idea of the spiritual journey, our idea of Jesus Christ, our idea of God Himself gets shattered. And this is the great work of the night of the Spirit. And because of this over-identification with our own concepts and preconditioning, we sometimes think we're losing faith in God, or God has abandoned us, or God has rejected us in the night of Spirit. It isn't that God is dead, but that our concept of God, our way of responding to Him childishly, is being laid to rest. And this transition can be very painful, because it seems like an uprooting of what is absolutely closest and dearest to us. So this undoing is perhaps the heart of the night of Spirit. And just to give one example from the Scripture, Joseph, the husband of Mary, had planned his life around living with this marvelous person whom they had reached some agreement in regard to living together as brother and sister, or in a celibate kind of marriage, and some people actually do that today. And then all of a sudden she became pregnant. And being a dutiful Jew, he doesn't know what to do with this. Notice the double bind. He couldn't doubt her innocence, at the same time he couldn't doubt the evidence either. And so he either perceived the mystery or thought, because of his great humility, that God must have something to do with this, and so the best thing for him to do was to withdraw and let God work it out. And so he decided, the Scripture tells us, to put her away privately, which was the way to handle such situations in the Jewish community of that time. In other words, his idea of his future life was completely shattered at that moment and left him completely alone, completely unaware of what to do except to let that divine providence work it out. It was only then, after he went through that decision of letting go of the thing that was absolutely dearest to him in this world, his life with Mary, that the angel appeared and said, Joseph, don't be afraid to take Mary home as your wife. This is exactly the situation, is it not? In which Anthony found himself, so to speak, God waiting until the struggle, the tension, the liberating influences have completely done their work before he moves in and solves the situation for you by removing the problem. So most questions really don't need an answer. If you sit with them long enough, they're withdrawn. Not because they were not questions on that level, but the tension moves you through the double bind situation to a new perspective where it is resolved in the higher unity in which you see the problem resolved as a complementarity rather than opposition. And then the question is simply withdrawn as irrelevant. What is a question on one level is not a question when one moves to a higher level of unity. So Anthony then, as he moved into divine union and expressed it for 20 years in the fort, struggling with the demons, now he was more or less in charge, and they're represented as pleading with him to please go home and leave their territory, while he keeps battering them with the verses from the Psalms. And then when his friends take down the door, his his true mission begins to come into flower, in which people from all over the Mediterranean world begin flocking into the desert and turn it into almost a holy city, where once the demons with their military-industrial complex were grinding out every day new programs and missiles for upsetting the human race and destroying people's happiness. Just to close with just a few notes of Anthony's life after he emerged from the fort. There was one occasion where he began to get a little uneasy about all the people coming to see him and the adulation and people asking him to work miracles, of which he sometimes worked a few. And so in his humility, he decided there was something wrong with this situation. So he decided to escape and disappear and go to some place where no one would know him. And then he could give himself to his great love of solitude. For Anthony, solitude is both a place and an interior state. And there's an interesting progression in the book where he goes from one mountain to the next, physically or geographically. And these are symbols of his ascent to the interior mountain of divine union and the return of his whole being to its source in God. And so on this occasion, he made up his mind to run away. This is kind of an amusing incident, and so I thought I would read again from St. Athanasius' book. And while he was sitting there by the Nile waiting for a boat that would take him downstream, a voice came to him from above saying, "Anthony, where are you going and why?" These are always the questions the Holy Spirit asks of us. So it's a kind of paradigm. And even in a close as union as Anthony had with God, you can make some mistakes. But this is, by entering into dialogue with God and not jumping too quickly, you learn a certain poise of waiting for the signals and for the right time. Timing seems to be extremely important in the spiritual journey. You may have great zeal for something, but it might not be quite the right time. In any case, Anthony was not bewildered because he was used to hearing such calls. And so he replied, "The crowds don't permit me to be alone, so I want to go to the upper Thebaid. Moreover, they ask me things beyond my power." So he was a little nervous about the adulation he was getting. It just didn't fit. And so the voice replied, "Whether you go to the Thebaid, or as you have been considering, down to the pastures, you will have more, yes, twice as much trouble to put up with. But if you really wish to be alone, then go up to the inner desert." And Anthony said, "Who will show me the way? I'm not acquainted with it." And almost at once, some Saracens arrived who were going in that direction, and they took him with him, and he came to the foot of this glorious mountain with a lovely cold spring of water at the bottom of it. Anthony, as though inspired by God, fell in love with the place. And that was what was meant by the voice who spoke to him at the river bank. Notice the inspiration of God, the misinterpretation of the holy man, but his willingness to listen for further directions, and finally the resolution. And this is how God usually gets us where he wants us. And sometimes it's a place, and sometimes it's no place. There's a great variety of vocations, of course, when one is following the movement of the Spirit. And the essential thing is to know how to listen, to be trained by listening to the Word of God, to be able to move with the moment and to sense the right thing to say and to do with dependence on God. He fell in love with the place. It reminds us of Bernie, doesn't it? He fell in love with this place. This is where he belonged. And sometimes this is one's destiny, to transform a place or to contribute one's energy to a place. And that's how sacred places and shrines come into being. In a sacred shrine where people have prayed or meditated, the walls, the soil, the countryside begins to get impregnated with a certain sacredness and these vibrations of peace. And so when people walk into that environment, without saying anything, if they're sensitive, they pick it up and feel at home, refreshed and nourished. And this is the case of Anthony in his inner mountain. So once he got settled there, he suffered the usual struggle of not knowing how much to share with his disciples and how much to be alone. And this dialogue, or this apparently opposing attractiveness, goes on and on throughout life. There's not really dichotomy between the two, but it feels that way. And so he then ministers from time to time to his disciples, but then returns into deep solitude. And this rhythm seems to be a paradigm of one of the best ways to lead contemplative life. To lead it intensely for a period of time, then to share it, to work into daily life, into one's body and relationships, the new insights and the new levels that one has received in solitude, and then to return from action to integrate the stimulation or the learning one has received from practical experience. And this seems to be the best rhythm in which to grow, given our human condition. And finally, it came time for Anthony to die after about 50 years of ministry. He was now about 105 or 6, a jolly good life. He knew he was dying, and so he had a few last words for his disciples. And since he had fought so much with the demons all his life, they even tried to get to him out there in the inner mountain. And this is what he said: "You know the demons and their designs. You know how fierce they are, yet how powerless. So do not fear them." After all that experience, we should hear that. The demons are just ants, really, to be stepped upon, but they pretend to be monsters. But what makes them so big is their hot air. And so if you just pray, they start to deflate like a balloon. And that's his teaching. So rather let Christ be your life's breath and place your confidence in him. Live as if dying daily. Again, not morbidly thinking of a corpse, but inwardly letting go of all the things that we love when God invites us to do so, as in the case of our friend Bernie in his death. And finally, distribute my garments, he said, to Bishop Athanasius, the writer of the book. Give the one sheepskin and the cloak on which I lie, which he gave me, but which has worn out in my possession. And to Bishop Serapion give the other sheepskin, and keep the hair shirt for yourselves. He gave to each one according to their state of life, I guess. And now, my children, God bless you. Anthony is going and is with you no more. Having said this, and having been kissed by them, he drew up his feet, shades of the patriarch Isaac, and with a look as though friends had come to him, and he was overjoyed at sight of them, for as he lay there, his face had a cheerful expression. He passed away and was gathered to his ancestors.